Matt has not enjoyed over the years, or over the episodes, has been Joni Mitchell. And it has been sort of Matt's burden that, while Josh himself has also not always enjoyed Joni Mitchell, it has come more from a agnostic standpoint, I think, than I don't like standpoint. And I have been growing to appreciate Joni Mitchell's wares more in the episodes. But Matt is, and I respect him for this, he is not on the Joni Mitchell train at this point. And he will be our last take on this album, which I feel like he always is with. He's either always first or last.
Out that way.
First or last with Joni Mitchell. He's never in the middle to hear it. Josh is actually the person who gets it first. I'm going to have Matt run the numbers first, and then we'll introduce the album. So go ahead, Matt. Run the albums.
So this is Hejira. I think I am pronouncing that right. Hejira by Joni Mitchell.
You better get that right. You better get that right.
Yeah.
It's Hejira. Yep.
Hejira. Thank you, Josh.
I checked it this week. It's Hejira. Yep.
It's a word for Exodus or movement.
Yep.
Of the people.
Yeah,
why didn't you just
you
say
did the
that?
same research as I did, Josh. I wanted to make sure we got
I Googled Hejira?
I did a little more than that. So okay, yeah, fair enough.
See, you made me laugh. Hejira, Exodus by Joni Mitchell. This comes in at number 128 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1976, number 546 overall, and in Rolling Stone's list, it comes in at number 133.
All right.
Okay.
Josh, go ahead.
I cracked the code on Joni Mitchell this week listening.
There you go.
Not sure my opinions changed, but I got it this time. It really is all about the lyrics for her, isn't it? I mean, I've
been saying that for the last two albums, guys.
I know, and I think that's why Matt doesn't respond to it too, and because her music, her music is kind of sparse. It's definitely her on the guitar as the primary focus. But
although noticeably with one difference, this album, which I'm going to point out in my segment. But yeah, I was I firmly paid attention to, or I focused in on the lyrics intentionally this week listening to this. I pulled them up on Spotify as I was listening, and she has a great way with words, and I think that's what people respond to. She has these lyrics that create an imagery and a mood and a place and time with their lyrics, and she has a lot of emotion in them too. I think recently we've talked about Patti Smith. I think there's a comparison there lyrically to kind of the level of talent that we're dealing with. Even something like Nick Drake was another person that sprang to mind in terms of lyrical talent and that ability to convey the sound, the emotion through the music and lyrics. So that was kind of my main takeaway listening to this. The songs are a little long at times in terms of my opinion, but she's taking her time to tell the story of what she was talking about. I think her lyrics themselves have also evolved. I think she has probably improved as a writer looking back and thinking about the previous albums that we do. So I think that's why this album, didn't you say this was the highest rated album, Matt?
No, that's Still Blue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so those two, right? It's like Still Blue is like her kind of breakout album, and this is her.
Yeah, I think Blue is roundly, widely considered her best album.
But I think the lyrics are better on this album, and I think her singing is better on this album. I think her voice has improved as well. That's something I've noticed. Or not necessarily her voice, but the way she sings or the direction that she goes in with that. And she is in command of her material and confident in her singing. And so that was kind of the main takeaway, and I can understand why people like it. Again, like on the flip side, the music is nothing to write home about. There's never going to be any sort of catchy pop song with her or hooky song. Ooh. I think she's kind of like that's why she's never going to like rise to the level of some of the other artists I like, but I can respect her as an artist, and I definitely understand like her talent and ability.
Now, see, this is an interesting one for me because this album's very different to me than the other ones we've covered from Joni Mitchell. And once again, for those listening, this is a cold listen, hot take, so we purposely don't do research ahead of it to go in. And three things jumped out about this album instantaneously. One is that Joni Mitchell's lyrics are excellent, but she's back to writing very much about herself, and in particular, like, her love life, and she has a highly sexualized love life, which I really want to point out. Like, and I don't say that negatively, but it is like the through line of this record, like a couple of the earlier ones we covered, is really about a series of affairs, both long term and short term, right? That she has at different stages. Now, in cheating a little bit, I was curious who these people were, because it was clear she was not talking about an other, like she kind of got onto in the hissing of summer lawns, right? This is back to being about her. And it seems like the theme of this album was solo travel and the dissolution of a couple, which isn't hard to figure out. These albums' lyrics tell you in these long stories, right? It's with the exception of that one interlude into like Amelia Earhart, just kind of out of the clear blue, which was interesting, but kind of veered off of it a little bit. The rest is, about these series of love affairs that she has. And it's just very interesting to hear a woman in the 70s sing this explicitly about not necessarily romantic relationships, but like the level of complexity of these relationships, right? And some she's totally in control, some are like almost one night stands, some are ones where she's sort of the victim or feels fragile. She's all different parts of relationships depending on who it is. She's the hunter on some, or the coyote, like in this one and the others, right? Like, that song Coyotes clearly about, like, she's like having a passionate love affair with a guy who's kind of like a heartbreaker, right? And she's trying to like couch that, right? Like, do I let myself emotionally be vulnerable or not be? And so that was number one. Number two is the bass that shows up on certain songs. I'm like, whoa, that's a new element right there. Well, that's Jaco Pastorius who's on it, which, okay, immediately makes sense because like it screams, it's very different from her other albums.
Should I know who that is?
Yeah, you probably should. He's a hugely, well, you know me, I love the bass. He's one of the top 5 bassists of all time. He has a very distinct sound. That's a whole nother conversation for another. But anyway, he's on this album. I believe it's on 4 songs, and I immediately recognize his presence. It adds a layer. I like what Joni Mitchell's doing with the finger picking on the guitar here again. Not since Blue have I liked the guitar parts on a Joni Mitchell album as much as I like them on this one. I thought this was the most complete Joni Mitchell album. It was... The lyrics were not like on Blue, where it was too many words at one time, as Matt said, which was absolutely true. Sort of the early Springsteen thing where it's fitted. There's a lot of words here, but they're spread out more. Sort of the finger picking, and I wouldn't necessarily, I know a lot of people think of her as a guitar virtuoso. I don't hear it that way necessarily in terms of the sound of it. I'm sure there's a technical argument for that, but I like what she's doing guitar-wise here. The bass lines stand out. She's experimenting. Apparently she hated the studio musicians, not hate it, but like didn't like the sound of her songs. So she sought out jazz musicians. I heard that on this album. It's got a different musical sound to it. I felt it has a little bit more heft to it. From everything I found out, Joni Mitchell's an interesting stage at her life during this. She's traveling, these relationships. I guess she picked up a cocaine addiction along the way and dropped it shortly afterwards, but as a result, like, there is a little bit more danger that I heard in the lyrics and the sound, which I guess could be in there. And I know, like, it was interesting reading the bio after this because it did line up with many of the things that I heard. Matt, your homework, no matter how you feel about this album, your homework is definitely to go listen to songs that Jaco Pastorius is on, because he's pretty freaking awesome. But yeah,
is he a jazz bassist?
He's jazz bassist, but he also, I think of him and he could do everything, right? Funk and traditional rock and roll. But yeah, I think his background is jazz bass, but he can do a little bit of everything. So yeah, I like this one. This was we've done 4 Joni Mitchell albums, right? I believe. Yep. And this is my favorite of the 4, and I would go so far as to say by quite a bit too.
So I'm not going to be as harsh on this as the other ones. I certainly, the thing that stood out to me on this album, what I did like was the guitar sound, the production, the tone of the guitar. It was a very kind of a light, soft electric guitar that she was playing. And I liked the mood and the tone that set throughout the album. This is kind of like more of a relaxing sounding album. Some of the words that I came up with while listening to this, it's peaceful, it's meditative, it's chill, it's jazzy, and I thought that was I liked the overall sound of that. I didn't pick up on the lyrics. It doesn't surprise me. I know she's a great lyricist, but again, that's not totally what I'm rushing to listen to. I thought a lot of the songs were long, but I wouldn't say that I wasn't annoyed by them as I was with some of the other stuff that she has that we've listened to. I'm still debating on whether I like this better than Blue or not. It's not. I think I probably still like Blue better overall, but what I liked about this was that production and the kind of the relaxed nature of the guitar, which just permeated. It sounded more of a modern sound. I think some of her other stuff. This one's the least dated sounding album, I think. Even Blue,
I would agree with that. Yeah,
Blue's not terribly dated, but Blue also just has that. It still has that '60s Laurel Canyon kind of vibe to it. That just. Yeah, but this Goner's like the orchestration, the overly kind of, which I heard a lot of that in the Hissing, whatever the
Summerlawns.
Yeah, the Hissing Summerlawns album, and so this actually seemed to it seemed more modern. Yeah, so I like that. So more of a jazzy, relaxed kind of vibe, and I didn't really have a ton of takeaways. I mean, it didn't really differentiate too much in terms of the sound that she was going for, the different types of styles, but it was pleasant, and I wasn't picking up on any type of real, issues that I had before with her voice or like singing or being too verbose. And I thought some things were reined in here, which I liked. So, and Josh, you mentioned Nick Drake. I got a Nick Drake feeling, and not just on the lyrics. It was the sound. Like this sounded like more of that Nick Drake sounding, music overall.
I can see her parts for sure. Yep.
What's that?
I think there's a direct corollary to some degree with the. It's certainly not as depressive as it.
No.
Yes, the sound. I can't believe you guys didn't hear the bass on this album. Like that was the number one thing that jumped out. The songs that have that fretless bass in it. Yeah. And not only because that's what this is known for. It was like. Before I did no research on this, but it was like, boy, that's immediately the first thing I noticed that seemed different, besides the tone, like you said, Matt. And so it's just very interesting because that's kind of what this album's known for. I
certainly heard the bass, but when my main takeaway was that the guitar sound to me was what I was picking up the most, or what stood out the most to me. So,
sure.
So this is more in my alley. It's still not. I'm still not over the moon for it. I still don't think Joni Mitchell is my cup of tea, and that's fine. I'm not going to say she's terrible. I think she's obviously a tremendous artist, and people love her. It's just she just doesn't scratch that itch for me. But this one is something that I think I could. This to me is a good evening album. The mood is kind of like a nice, kind of a quiet evening album. I could probably like lay down, relax, probably fall asleep to it, and there's a place for that. I think there's a place for that. But yeah, but she's, but if you're, Josh, you're saying, John, you've been saying too, she's, an artist mostly known for her lyrics and
her guitar.
That's right. She's a guitar player, right? And that's interesting. You said she's been known as You said people consider her virtuoso. Guitar
I know
player.
There's people like David Crosby who think she's like one of the 3 or 4 best guitar players.
He's biased. I mean, come on.
He is, but he's definitely he's not alone though. There's other people that say that. I think even when you did the bio for Blue, Matt, you mentioned like her finger picking style was considered to be pretty.
That's true. Yes, you're right.
You're
right. So I think I think that's a harder thing to pick up, like or to call somebody a virtuoso guitar player. Usually it's somebody that's playing like an electric guitar and they're noodling all over the place, like an Eddie Van Halen or a Hendrix or something like that. So like an acoustic guitar player that's strumming and finger picking, it's not as flashy, right? So it doesn't stand out as much. So I'm not saying that she's not, and you're right. I do remember that, she did have a unique way of playing the guitar. So so I think my overall take on Joni Mitchell, I think I liked Blue okay. I like this okay. There are two other albums, Court and Spark and The Hissing of Summer Lawns, not so much. And for me,
she would agree with you because she was annoyed by those two albums.
Okay.
The sound of the background musicians she felt didn't add to her songs.
Yeah, the Hissing.
She kind of was with you on some of it.
The Hissing Meadows one was just very that. It was very dated production and just, I don't know, it was boring. And she teased me with that one too because she had that jungle song that was awesome, and then she just didn't do that again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so
as we've mentioned, she's a very confident artist. So, and she pretty much said like, I'm, kind of the take on this was, I'm doing my part, but these other people are just not picking it up. She's got a little David Crosby in her, in terms of that. She also has a fascinating love life, and I don't like to, but I mean, just as you read, right? She's got a long-term boyfriend who she's breaking up with, a drummer named John Guerin. She's having a fling with playwright and actor Sam Shepard. Before that she was with Jackson Browne. Then there's a former boyfriend from Australia, and then there's this other guy who's a flight attendant in his third. Like she lived she is like almost like a rock singer type, male rock singer sort of. Dating all these people, these different people. She's very fascinating that way in the sense that, and we talked about in her early career, right? Like, I think she dated like all the members of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right? Like at different points. And that's not I'm just saying she clearly had a spirit that drew a wide variety of especially creative men to her, which, more power to her. I mean, it's just, she's a kind of a woman ahead of her time in terms of being liberated with all that comes from that. I think that might be what speaks to a lot of female fans of her too, that she wrote her own rules.
Yeah, I think she has a kind of a more realistic portrayal through her songwriting and songs of like what life is like and what relationships are like from a female perspective.
Well, or if you're a person that has collected a wide variety of relationships. I don't think most people have, decades worth of interesting people they date. You know what I mean? Yeah, some people, they date an accountant. You know what I mean? For like 3 years. They don't like date all of the, that's the thing. It's like she's got sort of like what you'd imagine.
She's worldly
like rock
in that
stars.
way.
Well, and what like male rock stars and male musicians were allowed to do for years, right? Date all of these different people that are exciting. She kind of, lived the dating life of a rock star. And that's, I hope in no way does that come off judgmental. It's more just an interesting take, I think.
No, you're right. Also, interesting that when you were talking about your review, John, that she was on the road a lot. I can see that this is almost like a loose concept album where like every song's a different part on the journey of a real long journey.
Which I felt about Blue too. I felt like that had a feel of it as well. She even the album title, right, is about like a journey.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Hejira?
Yep.
It's like an Arabic, right? So it makes sense because you could see it thematically. Unlike the Kansas album where I'm like, what is the thematic thing? This was not hard to figure out. This was and she and I think it was at Graham Nash in the first album we did where he's like, leave a little bit to the imagination here, Joni. You know what I mean?
Chris Christopherson.
Or Chris Christopherson, sorry. Yeah, there you go.
So you like this definitively better than Blue?
Yes. I actually didn't like Blue as much. If I had to pick a second one, I'd pick Hissing of Summer Lawns. I didn't love Blue. I'll be honest. I like the guitar on Blue, but not much else. I actually have grown to like each album a little bit more along the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm stronger on this album. I'd have to go back and listen to Blue again, though.
Yeah, okay. I'm probably in the middle between this and Blue, but I definitely liked. I'm glad we're ending on a little bit of a. This is probably as high of a note as I'm going to get on Joni Mitchell, so I don't want to totally because we're not covering any more of her. I don't think, right? This is kind of
you got to be honest though. We're not designed here to get sponsored clicks. That's not what we did this. And so we're gonna continue.
If we are, it's clearly not working.
Yeah, even if you. Well, we're not. Yeah, but we're gonna tell you if we don't like an album. I think though this week's a very interesting set of albums because there's complexity to it. I don't think it lends itself as easily to a cold listen hot take as many albums do.
Right.
So, well.